OpenAI is flattering us every day.
Humane has collapsed, Rabbit R1 has stalled, yet Limitless keeps shipping.
My first company, Optimizely, which I grew to 450 people and sold for $300 million. And I look back at that experience and realize 90% of memories are forgotten after a week. The true potential for technology is to augment human capabilities and give us superpowers. There's a hearing aid for hearing, glasses for vision. What's the equivalent for memory?
It's a pretty nice device, actually.
Our long-term vision is actually to free the human mind from its biological limitation.
What are the bigger implications of being able to instantly recall everything?
I view it as quite dystopian.
And my personalized AI interact in personal relationships with my partner.
I worry we're selling a drug that people get hooked on. It is the #1 use case, by the way, for LLM. Therapy and companionship. I'm not trying to be dismissive of Gen Z. Now they're kind of more socially isolated and they're more enabled to build human connection.
You have founded the Mind Emulation Foundation.
Most investors are very sheep-like. They just sort of go with the herd and trying to figure out what everyone else is doing.
Today on Accelerate Bio, I'm joined by Dan Siroker, founder of Limitless, the AI wearable defining the category before OpenAI has even shipped. Previously, he sold Optimizely for $300 million. We discuss where the space is headed, how to ship successful products, the risks of AI addiction, why memory is the next frontier in human augmentation, and how Limitless is quietly giving people superpowers. What I enjoyed most about this conversation is how easily Dan moves between the minute details of startup execution and a 100-year vision for humanity. The last few months have been pretty brutal for AI wearables. Humane has collapsed. Rabbit R1 has stalled, yet Limitless keeps shipping. So my question is, why is Limitless working where others have burned, in some cases, 200 million and fizzled out?
Yeah, it's interesting to see the A/B test between different approaches to building wearables. Our approach has been to focus on the problem first and work backwards to the solution. So we obsess, 80% of our time and energy on what are the problems we want to solve. For us, it started with the fact that we have, flawed memories. 90% of memories are forgotten after a week. It follows what's called the forgetting curve. It gets worse as you get older. Typically, people's memory peak when they're 20 years old. So that was what we started with. We had a problem, and we had lots of ideas how to solve that problem. A company called Scribe, which we then pivoted to Rewind, which then we pivoted to Limitless. So in some ways, we've actually been at it longer than anyone else. We've had 5 years to accumulate the scar tissue of what does it take to solve this problem. These other companies, I think, they seem to have started with technology in search of a problem. And usually those kinds of ideas rarely work. Sometimes they do, but rarely work, because what happens is you begin with what we try to build with a sentence that starts with, wouldn't it be cool if ... Wouldn't it be cool if you had lasers shooting out of your chest? And that sort of technology in search of a problem is a very scary way to build a product, because you're not sure if what you're building actually matters. At the end of the day, it really comes down to this really basic YC mantra: build something people want. And it's hard to build something people want if you're thinking too much about the technology and the capabilities versus the problems you're trying to solve. So in short, I think the reason why we've succeeded where others might have failed is that they had it backwards. They were looking at the technology and thinking, wouldn't it be cool if? We were thinking about the problem and trying to figure out the best way to solve the problem. And the technology just happened to be the way to do it.
That sounds wise. In that case, tell us more about the problem. Is it memory augmentation? Is it bigger than that?
Yeah, it starts with actually an insight I got that most people probably don't realize until they get older. But when I turned 20, or I guess in my 20s, I started to lose my hearing. And when I turned 30, I actually tried a hearing aid, and it was magical. I have a genetic condition called otosclerosis, and slowly my hearing declined. And when I tried a hearing aid, I had this magical moment. It was this insight into human biology, which is we all have these limitations that we don't even realize are there. Hence the name of our company, Limitless. For me, it was hearing. When I got a hearing aid, I didn't realize how bad my hearing had gotten. A couple examples. I put the hearing aid in, and it was amazing. I felt like I'd awakened to the world. The first time I turned a faucet on, I looked at it in awe, because it's like, this is making a sound. This whole time for the last few years, I had forgotten that that sound comes from a faucet when you turn it on. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you're like, wait a minute, what's he talking about? There's no sound out of a faucet. You should get your hearing checked. And that gave me this insight. Wow, technology, the true potential for technology is to augment human capabilities and give us superpowers. That's what it felt like, to lose my hearing and gain it back again. And that immediately it put me on this hunt. What are other things like that where technology could augment human capabilities? And then immediately I stumbled upon memory, because memory is just like it. Memory, you don't know what you forget. That's the big insight I got. It's like, just like your hearing, you don't know what you're not hearing, you don't know what you're forgetting. And that's the whole idea that started this company, and why we are where we are today, was this question of, there's a hearing aid for hearing, glasses for vision. What's the equivalent for memory?
Okay, so the problem, the thesis is memory augmentation. You said we forget 90% of stuff. So what are the bigger implications of being able to basically instantly recall everything? Where is this headed, and how is it going to change how we live our lives?
The biggest is, it allows people to be engaged and without being distracted by taking notes. Today, if you think about it, the most common method people have to not forget is, they take a tree, they chop it down, they turn it into a little rectangle called paper, they take a stick with ink at the end of it, and they scribble on that paper. And if you describe it in those terms, you kind of see how ridiculous that is. That is like the most common way most of society has thought of, oh, what you should do. But the fact that we don't have perfect memory, by the way, just think about this. If we all had perfect memory, nobody would take notes, right? So like, it is what we're doing right now to actually try to remember. And the challenge with that is, there's this common misconception that taking notes actually helps you remember what was said. And all of the studies that have been done on this show very interesting insight, which is, you will remember the thing you're writing because you're reinforcing that in your brain, but your brain can only really do one thing focused at a time. So you are selectively remembering the thing you write, but as you're writing, the thing that was said immediately after or during as you're writing, you forget. So you have this sort of spotty experience, a spotty memory of those experiences that you're taking notes from. So to answer your question, the first thing is, people will stop taking notes. You'll be able to actually stay engaged in the conversation. You'll be able to look the person you're talking to in the eye, and you won't have to do this sort of now seemingly anachronistic thing of scribbling on trees. I also think that it allows you to have a greater sense of self and a greater awareness of how you show up in the world. For me personally, having now worn the pendant basically every waking hour every day for the last year or more, I see so many ways in which looking back at what I say and what I hear can create, just helps me be better, helps me be a better CEO, helps me be a better husband, helps me be a better dad. In any professional sport, if you make a mistake, you are, if you're in the NFL, you throw an interception, you're on the sideline minutes later with a printout of what you missed, of that safety that you didn't see. And that ability to go back to, what did you miss? What are the things in your life that you didn't see the first time? It's so powerful. That really helps transform how we show up in the world. And so I think that's the true potential for devices like this, is to help us be better.
Okay, so help us be better, help us be more present. Those are things that Limitless already enables. Where does it evolve from here in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? Is it going to transform how we show up in the world more fundamentally? Is it going to give us additional superpowers?
Yeah, I think it'll evolve. I gave a talk recently around the future of personalized AI, where I go into the really, really distant future, potentially decades from now. And the basic idea is that we will have more and more of what we do today get offloaded to AI. And the main benefit of collecting all this context is, now, instead of just having this amazing, superpower of AI, which can do things that, soon, it's not hard to imagine it's going to be able to, obviously today it already can do kind of PhD writing. It's not far from imagining it could start doing new science and some major breakthroughs there. But things like, simple things like, the way I imagine it evolving is, soon it will be able to draft almost all your communication for you. All the emails you're going to send, instead of having a blank piece of paper, it has the draft of what you want to write. It has the context of how you speak, your tone, and the experiences and relationships you have. Instead of just like a standard, oh, it was a pleasure to meet you. It's like, you go back to the conversation, you can go back to the history, how you were introduced. So that, I think, is a big unlock in the next step. after that, it's really, I think, inevitable that AI will do the boring half of your job for you. Sure, a lot of jobs are going to get replaced by AI, but I also think people who use AI to do better and be more productive are also going to thrive in this next wave of AI. And so AI, I think, will likely do for most knowledge workers and even some non-knowledge workers, it'll do the boring half of your job for you. And for that, you really need context. To do your job, it's not as simple as plug in some generic model. That it needs to understand, especially if you're in relationships with other people, it needs to understand how you know them, the past, and then eventually agentic behavior identical to you. There's so many things you do today that you don't need to be doing, that if you had an AI with the context of your past, it would be able to do identically as you, and that just allows you to have more time to focus on your purpose and passion and the things that give you energy. So it's one of those things that I'm convinced our kids and grandkids will look back at today and be shocked at how we lived our lives. Like, wait, Dad, hold on, Grandpa, you guys just like lived your life forgetting 90% of what happens after a week, and you're okay with that? Like, that was just this massive amount of experience that's just gone, and you just did everything yourself. You didn't have AI take off all the boring stuff. And I think that's, to me, that's now, having felt it and used it for myself, it's not that far off. It may even be our kids who say that.
So what I'm hearing is that AI, personalized AI with sufficient context, can show up at work for me eventually. I'm assuming I can just send it to do my job. I don't need to worry. I can probably stay at home and do what I enjoy. If I really project like the sci-fi long-term scenario, can my personalized AI, who is basically identical to me, also like interact on my behalf in like all sorts of personal relationships with my friends, with my partner, like everywhere?
Well, I think there's a big difference between can it and should it or will it. I think, yes, AI can probably do a lot of things. And so I was very precise. I said it will do the boring half of your job for you. It won't, I don't think we will live in a world where people will choose to do or have AI do all their job, because they're doing their job not for the paycheck, but for the purpose and passion and the impact they have. And so I do think in a world with abundance and super intelligence, if people don't want to work, they don't have to. I think there's a vast majority of that. Today we have evolved even as a species from subsistence needing to work to now closer and closer to a world where the power and creativity and impact of AI can create a society where it's no longer the burden, but it's more what people choose to do, and it's something they do because hedonic treadmill. They want to have nicer things. They certainly don't need it for food and shelter and the basics of necessity. But as a species, we tend to want to consume more, and so I do think that's going to drive it. But also because people now can choose to do the kind of work that gives them energy, that gives them passion, gives them a reason to wake up in the morning. So what I don't think will change is I don't think people will want to live in a world where they have no purpose. It's actually probably the opposite. I think they're going to want more and more purpose, given that in the past, most of their purpose came from their livelihood, from their role, from their status. And so I think in that sense, you'll want to do the exciting parts of your job. You won't want to do the boring parts. And the boring parts is what AI can do exceptionally well. So, and similarly, like in your relationships with friends, like you could have the AI go in there. They're probably a pretty funny, great friend to be around. And, who knows, maybe they're embodied AIs as robots. But why would you want to? So I think it can, that if that's your question, yes. But I don't think we will do that, because we will choose where we want AI to be in our lives and spend our time on the things we want to spend our time on.
By the way, if you're enjoying this, please hit subscribe. We drop a new episode weekly, exploring how AI, biotech, and human enhancement are shaping the future. And if a friend would love this too, send it their way. It really helps us keep going. Now, back to the episode. I probably still want to attend personally, to like go out on Friday night and hang out with my friends, but I'm really bad at keeping in touch with people sometimes and like texting them often enough to check up on them how they're doing. So maybe I wouldn't mind to have my AI like proactively do that for me once in a while.
Yeah, and that's exactly, that's a perfect example of, like, there are things in our lives where we know we can be better. We can be better friends, but there are things holding us back from being better friends. And what you just said is a very simple thing. It's just the thoughtfulness to remember. It's actually a memory thing too. It's the thoughtfulness to remember
True.
to reconnect, to after a great night out, sending a text, "Hey, buddies, great spending time with you. Really appreciate it." And there's those small things that actually make a big difference. It's taking that activation energy and You don't have to remember to do it. You have the system do it for you. Maybe it's just, the next morning, after a nice fun night, you have a bunch of drafts of text messages in your phone. You look at, oh yeah, sure, I'll send that. That sounds great. And oh yeah, you knew that your calendar says you're free and that there's this concert that you both like because they know the context of your friend and what they're into. And you suggested, hey, next month, you guys want to go to this concert? I know they're performing and we've been there before. Like, that's exactly the power for AI. Is it takes those things that would otherwise have slipped through the cracks because of bad memory or activation energy, and it makes it even better. So I think that's a great example of where AI can augment humans, give us greater connection, because now we do the small things that get us to reconnect, and not necessarily replace us. They're not going to show up to the concert, but they're going to help us make sure it happens.
What is the most magical experience that you already had with Limitless, or that one of your customers maybe told you about?
One of the first magical moments we heard from a customer, this is not what we designed it for, but it was such a magical moment, was a few weeks after we had launched. She was one of the first users of our product. And she just wrote in and said, I was wearing the pendant. I didn't really know what it was for, what I would use it for. I was wearing it and I had a 1-year-old. I have a 1-year-old, she said. We went to the park. I was pushing the 1-year-old on the swing, and my 1-year-old turned around to me and said, I love you, for the first time. And she caught it with the pendant. She captured that precious moment, a moment that would be fleeting in any other world, where you would forget forever the things in time and place and the way that your 1-year-old says, I love you, to you for the first time. And she just wrote in how special that was. And that was like, then she was lit up. Parents in particular love the pendant because there's all these amazing things their kids say that just get disappear. So that's just one. It's not a productivity gain, but it's one of those reasons why capturing life. Life is precious, memories are precious. Capturing it spontaneously without having to take notes or remember to turn on a tape recorder or anything, just doing it frictionless, effortlessly, can be really powerful. That's just one of many, but that's the first that comes to mind.
Oh, that sounds really unique. I don't have kids, but I can imagine like how the emotional resonance of something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. I definitely have more sci-fi questions for you, but let's maybe get back to the pendant for a moment. So I have it with me here right now as well. It's a pretty nice device. I actually really like the design, and it looks simple. It feels simple, and basically what it is right now, it's a speaker, and what it does is listens to everything. It transcribes it, and it allows you to query it. And like back to some of the other AI wearables that I mentioned earlier, they seem much more complex. The designers have stuffed many more sensors on them. They're trying to have them do many more things agentically from day one. So is the simplicity? Uh, do you think that's one of the core reasons why Limitless is succeeding?
I think so. I am a big believer of the saying, "The main thing is the main thing stays the main thing," and that saying is inspired many ways because I look back at my first company, Optimizely, which I grew to 450 people and sold for $300 million. And I was younger when I did that company. I was in my 20s, and I didn't have kids. And instead of prioritizing, I just made up for lack of prioritization with sheer effort. I just put in a ton of time. And I look back at that experience and realize so little of that mattered. There's like 3 or 4 things that really mattered in terms of the outcome of the company. And I realized, hey, wait a minute, if I'm just thoughtful about how I spend our time, my team's time, the product's time, what we actually focus on, that has such a big impact. And so, sure, maybe you get it wrong. The other thing I realized in that, by the way, in hindsight, it's clear. I know what we should have focused on and what mattered. In the moment, it's not clear. It's totally ambiguous. You don't know what matters. That's the goal of prioritization. And that saying of the main thing is the main thing stays the main thing is just to have this purposeful focus on what you think matters. That goes to say in how we spend our time. That's what we build, what features we choose to implement, knowing that there's no good deed that goes unpunished. No amount of new feature you add isn't going to come back to haunt you when you realize, oh, well, hold on, there's a bug here and there's a complexity here. And what about battery life here? Like, everything has a trade-off. And so yes, yeah, I do think it's a simplicity. It's saying no. That's a hard thing to do when you're in this really ambiguous world where you're not sure what matters. It's being very customer centric. That helps with that, by the way. When you talk to a lot of customers and hear their pain points, it's very clarifying on what matters, what doesn't. And I do think maybe if you look at some of the other companies in our space that failed, it's very likely, I don't know for sure, but it's very likely the way they built it was very much like an ivory tower approach, where they're very smart and they sit in their ivory towers. And the ivory tower comes from this academic idea of like, you're sitting there just thinking really hard, and like, you're trying lots of things, but you're not out in the world. You're not actually talking to people. You're not hearing their feedback. You're not hearing what matters. So it's a combination of that simplicity, but with inspired by user feedback, user input, and customer empathy.
What are your plans looking forward, though? Is it going to remain an audio first, audio only device, or would you add other sensors? Would you add cameras at some point and more?
Yeah. So it's not crazy to imagine we'll add more. I don't want to tip our hand too much because we did make the mistake. I would say we had a double-edged sword with the way we approached the pendant, the first one. We announced it very, very early. Most companies would have waited. And we had been working on it for a while. And I think that gave some of our competitors an opportunity to, they say, imitation is the finest form of flattery. So we're very flattered by some of the companies out there and some of the approaches that they've taken. The good news for us is, even though they did do that pretty quickly, and it's very easy to copy, it's very hard to innovate. At the end of the day, the core problem of like listening to a customer and building something on their behalf, you can't really imitate unless you've done the hard work to actually understand those trade-offs. So I don't want to spill the beans. I will say that we have lots of exciting ideas that we are pursuing and doing in the same fashion of the first version. Lots of things we learned from the first version. But we will be working on subsequent versions that I think will really wow people, and take the same similar approach of what's the next big opportunity and next set of problems that customers that we can innovate on their behalf, and customer problems that we can solve.
Well, no alpha here today, unfortunately, but I suppose we just have to stay tuned. I will try to ask you maybe a different related question, though. What are your thoughts on how this space is going to evolve? And specifically, I mean, do you think people will end up with multiple devices for multiple purposes? So maybe I will have one audio device, one visual device. Maybe I will have one that I'm wearing on me all the time, and another one which is more like a home hub, like Amazon Alexa. Maybe one is more like a note taker, maybe another one is more agentic, or is it going to head towards like one all-in-one kind of device that does everything for me?
I think there's two things I think on that. One is that the practicality of just like, there's only so many spots in your body you can put something. So I think reality wise, there's likely only going to be one in this particular form factor. Obviously Meta is working hard on glasses. They're doing a good job there. I do think maybe you wear one or two wearables. I look at my day every morning. I put on my Apple Watch, I have my Aura Ring, I put on my pendant, my hearing aids, and so I'm pretty augmented, and I got my supercomputer in my pocket, my iPhone. So I do think like we already are kind of living in a multi-device world. I think maybe one of the flaws that Humane took when they approached this problem is they really tried to replace the phone. And that's just a tall order. I mean, people love their phones, and I think they started their company with this guilt of screen time, and some of the folks there played a small role in making the iPhone happen. So they sort of had this sort of like, that's usually not the way you start a company or a product, is out of like guilt or shame. You want to be thinking about something bigger than that. So I think that is something I think is likely to be true. Like we will have multiple devices. The other factor there, so I do think generally, to answer your question, there will probably be one category winner in each kind of form factor. Maybe there's a constellation of like, one larger company that can kind of figure it out. It's hard to do, but maybe that happens. I also think that there's some fundamental trade-offs with size and battery. There's only so much the battery can do. And that's another reason I think our focus helped, is that like, I do think it's really important that the battery lasts all day. If it lasts anything less than all day and you can't charge it overnight, then it's just a really high friction, really painful experience. And so with that, if you believe that premise that like generally your device should last all day, if you're going to wear it all day, then the amount of things, the battery of the size that you want to wear, that you can't, make it too bulky, is pretty limited. So like, that's another reason why you might need multiple devices in multiple places, is just like today, battery technology is not to the point where the density of the battery supports lots of really fancy things you want to do.
I think your approach is very smart in terms of not trying to replace the phone. I also have about 4 smart devices on me on an average day now, including my phone. But basically all of the others, they don't really have a screen, or they have a really small screen, and they are more like extra sensors that just give me additional information or capture additional information in case of Limitless that the phone can't, and they probably pair with the phone. And I think that's a very good mental model for this.
Thanks. Yeah.
Great. So back to your design process, you mentioned earlier that Limitless in its current form is a result of multiple pivots. I guess a slightly tricky question, but how many more pivots do you think it will take for you to reach the final form?
We are done pivoting. We have product market fit. We have figured it out. I think in the sense that now it's a question of going. It's more about doing more of what's working than to change. We actually probably could have even built what we're building today as part of Rewind, because part of what we're going to do this by the end of this year is, and this gets maybe gives you a hint on an earlier question you had, is by the end of this year, we are committed to taking screen capture and bringing it into Limitless. So Rewind, this Mac app we had that was very popular, still very popular, lots of people using every day, captures your Mac and your screen, and then lets you take that context and use it for as context for AI. We're going to bring that into Limitless, so now you have this seamless, capture everything you hear and say, hear and say with the pennant, and everything you see on your Mac with the screen capture as well. So I think that's where we're going. Is we'll be having to take more of, we have the foundation now to continue to build. We're obviously going to continue to innovate. We've got a huge, great team of engineers innovating and building things. We're trying not to tip our hand too much now that we've gotten flattered by not just small startups, but big companies like OpenAI is flattering us every day with their efforts. So we want to make sure that we're being not too cavalier about what we're doing next. We think we have a really good advantage, and the biggest advantage here is speed. So we're going to keep going fast.
So talking about OpenAI and Johnny Ive and their device, I've seen a lot of I guess very speculative images on Twitter, people comparing the potential form to Limitless. Do you know something that we don't about what they're building?
I do not know something you don't know. I am very flattered that they are building something similar to what we're building. Sam was actually one of our first investors back in 2020. I've only the utmost respect for them. My hope is, one thing I do know is what we do is our main thing. It's our focus. It will never be OpenAI's main thing. It will always be a second or third or fourth thing. So, they're focused on obviously AGI and a bunch of other efforts. So that focus is our biggest advantage, moving quickly. It's validating, frankly. It's a little bittersweet because we went immediately from this phase of this is weird and different, but we're the kind of only ones that did it well. That was kind of pre-OpenAI announcement phase. And now post-OpenAI phase, it's obviously this is we should be doing this. And now it's just a question of which tool is the right one to do. So in that sense, it's bittersweet. We went from this seeming crazy to now, this is not so crazy. Now it's a question of it's not so crazy, but who should we use this? Should we use the OpenAI one? Should we use the Limitless one? So we'll see how it goes. I feel pretty confident that we have a pretty good competitive advantage in what we're building, but who knows? They're a smart team. I give them a ton of respect. And obviously Johnny's done amazing things in his past as well.
It's probably very good publicity for doing another fundraising round, should it choose to.
Yeah, I mean, it would potentially be, it does validate the market, although the kind of investors I like are the ones that don't need that validation. Most investors are very sheep-like. They just sort of go with the herd and trying to figure out what everyone else is doing. I prefer the more bold investors who bet on non-conformist ideas, people who think that, when it's non-consensus, that's actually a good time to invest. And we're cash flow positive. We got plenty of cash from our last round. We have no need to raise money. We've got we're doing this really crazy thing, which is we build a product, people love it so much they pay for it, and that money is what funds our work. So I think that ability to take the money from your customers as they love your product, I think that's a much healthier way to build a sustainable business. You look at some of the competitors you mentioned earlier, and if you don't do that, you kind of run out of time. So we're excited to be in a situation where we're not dependent on investor capital to continue to grow, and we hope to be in a situation where we control our own destiny indefinitely.
So let's double click on that. You are indeed very famous for product-led marketing. As you said, you ship fast, you obsess about metrics, you listen to user feedback. Sounds obvious, not everybody does that. And I think you let the product speak for itself. But many others in the space of AI companions, most famously probably companies like Friend or Cluely right now, they, I guess it's fair to say, are taking the opposite approach. They are investing in some cases millions into purely marketing stunts. And I guess we could say that Elon is now doing a little bit of the same with Any. It's like pure marketing play. Let's make noise, even though the product is good as well. So do you also see the benefits of the opposite strategy?
Yeah, I don't see them as opposites. They could very well be complements. I mean, I think Elon, all the way back to the early days of Tesla, one of the things he saw was the need to change the social perspective and society's point of view on electric vehicles. Everyone back then thought they were slow, they didn't have enough range, and he really changed the world's point of view and like required, actually, if you think about it, just marketing. That's what it was. It's like telling a story and then proving it with a product. Elon is also famous for thinking of all of his efforts as not needing any marketing. Like he actually refuses to give people at his companies titles like marketing. He doesn't like to pay for ads. And then part of it is I think, very purist belief that if the product is good enough, it will sell itself or it will market itself. But at the end of the day, he himself is a great spokesperson. I mean, even if he stands up and talks about the product for an hour, that is great marketing. So
He still likes to do stunts, I think. Like they're not conventional marketing, but
yeah,
they're stunts.
Yeah, they are stunts, but he doesn't necessarily need to do that because he's Elon Musk. He goes on CNBC, he talks, he's going to get millions of people, and he's got X as a huge platform that magnifies his voice. So I actually think he's a little bit different than the other companies you mentioned. The other companies you mentioned, they are actually really good at marketing. I do think at the end of the day, I've realized this when I first saw Friends announcement when they bought Friend.com for 1.8 million, and they put on this super dystopian ad that got like 40 million views on Twitter. I think I looked at that and I thought, wow, actually I have made the mistake of thinking that before that, I used to think the worst thing you could do is, is sort of be dystopian, is sort of bad publicity. And then I kind of realized, like, actually, the worst thing would be irrelevance. Like, the worst thing is nobody's heard of you because then it doesn't matter. No one's going to use you. So at least, even though it was dystopian, and like, I don't think I've ever seen a greater difference in the number of views to the number of likes. I think it's got like 1,000 likes and like 40 million views. So a lot of people shared it just because, oh my gosh, can you believe this? But like that actually, I think, now he's got a lot of mind share. People know that's out there. And if he delivers, they haven't shipped yet, but if they deliver, then that's a huge opportunity. But the problem is you can't just market forever. At the end of the day, you do have to deliver. You're making a promise with your marketing. If you don't deliver on that promise, that actually could really hurt you because then you're forever tainted as like, over promise, under deliver. So I'd rather, I think the worst outcome would be irrelevance. Nobody hears it. Even worse would be a great product that nobody's heard of, which many startups are. They're great products that don't figure out distribution and they fail because of that. So I don't see them as either or. I do think you need to have great distribution. You need to have great marketing. If you want to be relevant and have people hear about you, obviously the best way to do that is with a product that people tell other people about. But if you don't have that, I don't think Cluely has that yet. They're still very early on. Friend hasn't launched yet. If you don't have that, you don't have much else to talk about. So I don't shame them for going out there, and even if it's a little dystopian. And Cluely in particular really leaned in on like cheating on everything and all these things that were kind of out of the Overton window and still probably are. They have no shame, and so I give them credit for being fearless. I do think some people think that's like they'll never use it, but I think for every one of those, there's probably 5 being like, "Oh, that's kind of cool. I didn't know that existed." And so, yeah, jury's still out. I don't think it's necessarily bad, and it's I give them credit for. It's hard to break through in a world today where there's so much going on in social media. So I give them credit for at least breaking through and getting people's attention.
I think what I did is really smart. Controversy sells, and yeah, some people will get upset, but even many of those people will probably still want to try it. So I think it probably works really well. And I guess what I hear you say is that the product needs to be good, but you can still do marketing stunts for people to notice it in the first place. However, in your case and with Limitless, it feels like you don't feel the need to do marketing stunts. You're satisfied with word of mouth.
I'm very satisfied with that. We're very lucky to have a product that has a 99.6% keep rate. 0.4% of people return it, which I think, as far as I can tell, is the absolute best in the market. Even iPhone has a 3.5 times higher return rate. So like that is already by itself a huge asset that will by itself. If we did nothing in marketing, we would continue to grow just because people wear it, they love it, and they tell other people. And like that's the best way to grow. If neither of those companies have that, so I understand like you got to do some stunts to get mind share. I do think the common trope is, first time founder obsesses about product, second time founder obsesses about distribution, third time founder obsesses about both. I do think it is a common mistake for a technical person like myself to think that distribution doesn't matter. I do not. I believe that, to build a great business, you need a great product that's necessary, but it's not sufficient to build a great business. You do need to figure out distribution and scalable ways to grow. It certainly helps to have a good product that makes distribution and marketing and getting people to pay attention much easier.
Do you have a sense for who is like your average user persona? Is it like Gen Zs? Is it people with kids kind of in your demographic?
Yeah. So we have such a broad, and we look at this all the time. We have such a broad user base. There isn't a average persona that makes sense. That's like saying, what's the average temperature of a hospital? You want to look at the patients, not the actual hospital. And I do think the pockets of product market fit that feel very strong are, number one, folks with ADHD, folks who are neurodivergent. This is like one of those things from the very beginning, even with Rewind, this is like an oasis in the desert for them. They could not operate in the world as well as they do today without dependence. So that's just one that just naturally came out of the data. The second is parents, people who are busy. They're juggling work life. They want to capture precious moments for their kids. They all want to follow up on action items from their meeting. So people who are busy. I would say broadly, just general working professionals are good, but that's not really a specific ICP or narrow group of people. We're seeing healthcare professionals and lawyers see this as very valuable as well. We are HIPAA compliant, so doctors can wear this when they meet with their patients. So instead of actually sitting there, and if you've ever had a doctor's appointment where they're just sitting there taking notes the whole time, but you can actually look eye to eye with your patient if you're a doctor and be present, engaged, really give your full self to it. And you can rely on the pendant to capture the medical history and all of the things you otherwise felt the need to take notes on. So those are just a few examples. I mean, the list is very long, but we have a lot of folks for whom this is a really powerful tool to give them superpowers.
So just to be a little cheeky again, and I hope you forgive me.
That's fine.
I know a lot of these AI wearable companies are being built by Gen Zs, very different persona from the people you hire, I believe. I know Sam Altman has also said that Gen Zs are the only ones that are using ChatGPT truly as their operating system. He said nobody else gets it like those people. Do you think Gen Zs will be the best or the earliest adopters for any kind of AI-first devices? And do you think maybe you might be missing something by not focusing primarily on them?
Maybe. I think that there are some downsides to that audience. Namely, they're not as busy, and the pain of the products, the problems we're trying to solve aren't as visceral. Just a good example is if you don't have kids, like you don't know what it's really like to prioritize. You can just make up for lack of prioritization with sheer effort, and you don't end up really needing AI to augment. Like most of your stakes in your life are pretty low. Like, no one's going to die because you didn't come home at 5 o'clock and feed them, and so I don't even mean to be dismissive of Gen Z, but like at the end of the day, the product you build is only going to create as much value as the problem you have that it's solving. There are a lot of Gen Zs who are lonely, and maybe friend.com and some of these other AI companion apps could be good for that. But I also think Gen Zs tend to have more friends than folks who are later. Oftentimes, actually, it's a lot of millennials who are now lonely if they haven't found what they're looking for in terms of partnership. So I'm looking at the data objectively. I'm not against Gen Z. I think Gen Z is much more open to new technology for sure, and the social acceptability issue is pretty low in terms of adopting new wearable devices. So I'm not against it. I'm just looking at the objective facts of like where are we creating the most value? Who's actually? It's not. And by the way, those categories were not choices we made. Those are just where the market is pulling us. Like ADHD. We never said let's build a product for folks with ADHD. We could have. That might have been a good idea. But like the market is pulling us there. And most Gen Z users are not, honestly, they usually have really great memories. If you're less than 20 years old, your memory is pretty good. They don't care as much about being better. They're maybe at a phase in their life where like they kind of are okay that things slip through their cracks and falling. Like their ability to make commitments to others and stay engaged, I think that is just not as big of a problem for them. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents on it. I'm not trying to be dismissive of Gen Z. It's just like that's not where the data is showing that the problems we're solving are as visceral as for other folks.
It's fair enough. And You mentioned AI companions. Let's talk about that for a second. It feels like many products are headed there. Feels like Grok with the latest avatars is also headed there, at least somewhat. Um, it seems to make sense to give your AI assistant, or whatever you want to call it, a personality, like a very human-like, engaging personality. Is that a direction you could see Limitless headed towards as well at some point?
Maybe. Although I personally view many of those technologies, and a friend is a good example of, like, I think they are absolutely focused on a real problem, loneliness. But I view it as quite dystopian to solve that problem with what feels like empty calories, like what feels like an inauthentic connection with another. You're tricking the human brain into feeling like there's a reason we feel lonely, and it's like rooted in our history of a species and being outcast as the tribe. You would ended up dying, and there's a lot of reasons why we're wired as humans to try to seek companionship. We're a social species, but to seek that in an artificial system feels actually like maybe empty calories, in the sense it feels good in the moment, but like it's not actually solving the deeper problem. And like, will you feel unsatisfied having spent so much time and energy building companions that are at the end of the day not real? I'm sure there are people who feel good about doing that in the short term, but it feels like you're selling a drug. It's a powerful thing you're solving, and I worry you're selling a drug that people get hooked on. It is the number one use case, by the way, for LLMs is therapy and companionship. Therapy, I think, is actually great. Companionship, I do worry there's going to be a world where you look back at your life and like, wow, I did a whole disservice to this whole generation of people who use my product, and now they're kind of more socially isolated, and they're more unable to like build human connection, and certainly very challenging to have kids, because like it's very difficult to do that with AI, close to impossible. And so I think that that's my fear there. So I just have chosen personally, like, I don't want to work at a company that in my opinion makes loneliness, it solves maybe the ephemeral and sort of short-term empty calorie part of loneliness, but doesn't actually solve it at the deeper level. So I believe the solution to loneliness is deeper human connection, not shallow AI connection.
I'm assuming you have seen the movie Her and you don't like that future.
I don't mind the future. I mean, I actually think Her talks about some really interesting things, really ahead of its time. I think there are a lot of things that the character, the personified Charlotte Johansson's character in that movie, do exceptionally well. Like, he doesn't need to see a screen. He doesn't need to, and he, ask Samantha, the character, Her, for, what emails did I get, what message did I get, and I do think there's a lot of perfect example of taking the boring parts of your job and have that be part of what the AI system can do. But then to take it to the next level, which is, and of course, by the way, there's also, I think, a lot of it where, he's wrestling with, it's actually a really good example. Like, he was wrestling with, he had divorced his wife, or the wife divorced him, and they never had the right connection. And he kind of replaced that inability to have a great human connection with AI. And I think that also is an interesting, like, dystopian view on what happens if you have that. Most people don't have that today, so they end up figuring it out. They figure out, how do I make another human want to be with me? And I think there's a certain amount of humbleness and willingness to put yourself in a position of taking a risk to do that. It's kind of cheating to use AI as a way, because you don't have to learn what it takes to sacrifice it. In some ways, that sacrifice of what it takes to be with somebody else, I think, is an important lesson that people won't learn if they're talking to a purely agreeable and flattering AI that will never actually have a fight with you. So I don't know. I think that that is actually a really great story of how this could go well and could go wrong. I don't think it's purely bad.
It could turn us into super egoistical, self-obsessed people. I think there's a real risk. But when you mentioned earlier empty calories, what it also made me think about is the current social media, Web 2.0, Facebook, for example, like Zach loves to talk about how his mission is to bring people together, create connections, blah blah blah. But when what ends up happening, and I think largely due to incentives, just trying to maximize engagement via doom scrolling these feeds, the result is often more loneliness and all sorts of other psychological issues that we are finding these social networks are causing now. So do you think AI companions will be better at avoiding this trap?
No, I think they'll be worse. I think it's a great analogy. I mean, I think at least today, the garbage that people consume when they're doom scrolling these social media platforms is for the most part human generated garbage and rage bait and but like it's and so it's that but an AI could do it far worse, and then you're sitting there doom scrolling a chat conversation with somebody who's not real, who knows exactly what to say, to manipulate you into staying engaged, who has a superpower of like manipulation, and then on top of that, if it has like some visual components to it that can be artificially maximized to trigger our mammalian and reptilian sensors, I think it's like the worst possible version of hacking the human brain and hooking them on this sort of dopamine loop that could be really dystopian. Yeah, I think either way, whether I exist or not, or a product exists, there will be products out there that will hook into that part of the brain, and tens of millions of people on this planet, hopefully not hundreds, but certainly tens of millions, will forever be trapped by these dopamine loops from AI. That maybe that in the moment feels good, but I do think most of these people, as they get older, as they realize, wow, I just wasted a decade of my life building a connection with something that's not real, there's going to be a lot of regret. I think there's going to be a lot of, I hate to say it, but like suicide, and people realizing, wow, I actually, I got hooked on the thing that's not real, and that I have no way off, because I have no way of making a regular human connection. And so I do see that as a very, very sad outcome. I mean, people do it today from Instagram, just from feeling body shamed by what people show as like what they think the the ideal of what somebody should look like. There's so much worse that an AI can do than what at least you're seeing. Maybe you're seeing makeup. The equivalent is makeup. You see makeup and you see flattering angles on Instagram. That shows you a different view of the world. AI can do that like 1,000x worse, and it knows exactly how to hook into the human brain to manipulate. So I am a bit worried about that.
Is there a real way for AI companies, including yours, though, to avoid this? Because I think even with social media, all these founders, they probably start with the right intentions, but the way to maximize monetization is to create these dopamine loops eventually, and that's why it happens. So how can we even avoid it?
Yeah, I mean, it's I can't prevent my competitors from doing that. I mean, some of them are very much doing that. So there's nothing I can do to do that. I just know that that's not the kind of, I know today that's not the kind of world I want to live in. And I also don't need to rely on these sort of cheap tricks to keep a dopamine loop. It's a big enough dopamine loop to have the first time your 1-year-old says, I love you captured. Like that's good enough. I don't need more to get somebody to say they're going to be a paying customer for life. Certainly if you can do half the boring job for you, that's a great human augmentation use case that doesn't require me to create a cheap trick to get somebody to stick around. So it's just being purposeful and choosing. Like there's lots of problems in the world to solve. You don't have to resort. Not every company needs to resort to hacking the brain to end up getting engagement. The other big thing is like we're not. This is come to your point around Meta. We have just a fundamentally different business model. Meta is incentivized to get people to stay on their platform because their whole business model is ads. We don't do that. We have this amazing thing, which is a customer buys our product. We have zero incentive to turn that customer into a product. We will never sell your data. We're not doing ads. And so if a user likes our product and they pay for it, then that funds our business. And I think just that fund, if you go back to incentives, that business model is way more aligned with a positive social order than an ad-driven business, where you're always going to be incentivized to maximize rage bait and hooking people and engagement.
Let's incentivize the right kind of dopamine, such as your baby's first words. I like the sound of that. But to switch gears for a minute, I would love to talk about mind emulation. It's something you're very big on as well. So can you tell us, how does memory augmentation lead to mind emulation eventually?
Yeah. So mind emulation is an idea that will sound crazy the first time you hear it. And it starts with kind of this premise of like, what makes you you? And it's a question in philosophy is called philosophy of mind, and philosophy of self, understanding what makes you you. And we all have different points of view. Lots of folks who have believe in religion have a certain set of view of the soul and dualism, and there's a physical body and there's a separate self. if you believe some of those ideas, then the idea of mind emulation will seem impossible. And maybe it is impossible, but not for those reasons. Mind emulation is the idea of taking what makes you you and emulating it non-biologically. Emulating meaning not just simulating, not just making a clone or a twin, but actually taking the substance. Or substance is the wrong word. It's actually quite the opposite. It's not using the substance. It's the pattern that emerged from that substance. Today, the substance is meat and neurons in the brain. One day, that substance could be different as long as the pattern that creates this emergent property of self, of this qualia, this objective experience in the world, is emulated. And in order to do that, we have to do a lot of other very hard things. I do think it's inevitable as machines become more intelligent, as they're built in ways that mimic the things that create subjective experience. I think machines will become conscious. We have actually, we're hiring, if you're interested in consciousness in machines and connectomics, the connections in the network of the brain. We're hiring for that, a research role in this question of conscious machines. And so our long-term vision is actually to free the human mind from its biological limitations. That has two meanings. Today, that means taking the boring parts of your job and not having to focus on that. But the deeper meaning of freeing the human mind from its biological limitations is allowing you to choose when to die. Life is precious. We happen to embody that life today in this very fragile biological system. If that biological system was emulated non-biologically, then you could choose to die. And I think it would be a much more humane world where we don't die because of some disease we can't control or because we got hit by a bus. We die because we're ready to die. And I think everyone will be ready to die. Just today, most people die before they're ready. And that's tragic in my mind. I think it's tragic to live in a society where we just assume that death is inevitable and we should just let the natural course of things happen, and we die because our biology disappears. So I know that sounds crazy. If you're listening to this, think, wow, this guy doesn't, it just sounds too hard to believe. I did put an hour-long talk on this exact topic of what it means to build conscious machines. How do you emulate a mind? It's the future of personalized AI is the name of the talk. You can see it on YouTube or on Twitter/X. And I'll just say right now, it sounds impossible, but many things once sounded impossible that now are possible. And so I would have you please keep your mind open to this possibility.
Well, we're definitely going to link to that talk in the show notes. And so I'm aware you have founded the Mind Emulation Foundation 7 years ago now. Is that still operational, or is that converging with Limitless? Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so that is still operational. It funds, there's no full-time people, it's just me, but it funds academic research. So that doesn't fit as well with like a for-profit company. We have funded research in connectomics, in the basic science necessary to understand how the wiring of our brain creates the science of what we do. That is, that was something I started. It was an attempt, I'd say it's mostly an attempt to solve this mind emulation problem through a nonprofit versus through a for-profit. My belief today is that the best way to build an institution that can fund ultimately the work necessary to do this is as a for-profit, because it allows you to create a product like the pendant, which can create value, and that value gets translated into revenue, which gets translated into investment. And so today, my belief is the best way to make mind emulation a reality in this world is very similar to what SpaceX does. SpaceX has Starlink. Starlink isn't a great product. It gives you internet access anywhere in the world. That's a good idea. That has nothing to do with going to Mars, other than the fact it lets you ship those things up into space. You shoot up some rockets, you put those satellites out there and give you Starlink. The funding, the money that Starlink product provides creates funding that creates an enduring institution that then can continue to go on this quest over the next few years and decades to get to Mars. So the analogy I draw is that Starlink is dependent the way that going to Mars is mind emulation. So I believe that's the best enduring way to go after this mind emulation vision. Mind emulation could take 100 years. It's very hard for me to imagine a nonprofit lasting 100 years. I do think this company, if we continue to be successful, could last 100 years. And I want it to in order to fund that long-term ambition.
So you mentioned 100 years. I believe on the foundation website, it says we should be able to map the whole brain by 2080, which I suppose is just one of the steps we need to get there. What I'm curious about is, though, has the recent progress in AI changed your timeline on this?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I put that website together, that was before large language models. It was before even deep learning became hot. It was 2017, 2018. And a lot has changed. In fact, my latest estimate, looking at the most recent progress on mapping the human brain, is that we will be able to map a human brain by 2040. There's a startup out there who is pitching 2035. So I do think mapping the brain of a human, which is a very, very hard problem, is very now within our lifetime. The other thing you need in order to map, in order to emulate a brain, is being able to cost effectively do the number of calculations per second to emulate sufficiently fast enough the brain. And the best estimates I have on the number of calculations per second per $1,000 will be that the human brain will be feasible in 2047. So the 2040s are going to be awesome. Now, the reason we're doing what we're doing is because we think in order to actually emulate a human, you're going to need a lot of behavior data as well. That's what the pendant captures. It's what you say and hear and soon see. That will then be very useful. It's not necessary. I mean, it's not sufficient. You still need the brain map. You still need the ability to do the compute. But those three ingredients of a brain map, cheap compute, and behavior data, I think are critical ingredients to emulating a human mind.
So back to that timeline, and I get it from everything that you said. You believe AI is going to speed things up a lot, but it doesn't seem like you believe in this exponential AI takeoff scenario, like many others are professing, where by 2030 AI is self-improving and going to change basically all scientific problems for us in an exponentially short amount of time.
I actually do believe that, but I think it's overblown. I think yes, and actually it is already self-improving, and I actually think we've hit AGI, but nobody's really willing to admit it. Just like we whooshed past the Turing test, and very few people are willing to admit it. Just people are really hard and reluctant to admit change and see change. Same thing happens with telephone, electricity, any major technological invention. And yes, new AI models will create new science. We will have artificial superintelligence sooner than people expect. But I think that then the people make this leap to then and everything will be solved overnight. A lot of problem will. I think most biological disease, things that are solvable biological problems like disease, I think are very likely curable. But that doesn't mean you will live forever, and certainly doesn't mean that there's other things that are not curable will ultimately cause you to die. I think if you look at the data, life expectancy went down in some countries, like the United States, the last few years. I think now maybe this year went up. But we're not doing a good job. We're spending way, way, way more per capita on health, and certainly on healthcare and on research and improving, and the outcomes aren't changing. There's a fundamental limit to your biology and its ability to endure. And that limit, I think the only way you can go limitless is to move off of biology into a much more durable substrate. So I am all for artificial. I think people are underhyping artificial intelligence. I think today, certainly in pockets of, if you use O3 Pro, if you say that's not AGI, I don't know what your definition of AGI is. So we have already achieved it, but people are kind of reluctant. Mostly, I think there's incentive problem around admitting it. All these labs want to be, they want to be in this funding game. Certainly, OpenAI has a perverse incentive because as soon as they declare AGI, then Microsoft takes over a bunch of stuff. So there's a lot of reasons why people aren't being public about the AGI-ness. You have to ask yourself, why is the goalpost keep moving on the definition of AGI? And there's some interesting incentives at play for that. But no, I'm absolutely I'm not a doomer. I do think AI is getting better and better and self-improving. But the logical leap people then make is, well, then all bets are off. But I don't think all bets are off. We'll just have a system that's really smart. Like just today, by the way, just if you think about it this way, there are people out there smarter than you today. There are people who are more super intelligent than you and than me. And does our life automatically change or get better? No, hopefully they're working on high impact things. And certainly
they're not 10,000 times smarter than us, though. They're 50% smarter.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, not 10,000 for sure, but there's also a couple billion people on this planet. And you'd think there's probably, 1 million people that are, I would say, 50% smarter than us, or let's say 100% smarter, they're twice as smart as us. But then all of a sudden, does that everything get solved? I don't know. And I also think the smarter you get, the more energy it's going to need. You're going to be constrained more by that. And obviously, great AI could solve a lot of our energy problems as well, and probably solve global warming. So I do believe in all of that. It just, I think it's a big leap to then say, well then all bets are off. Because yeah, life will get immensely better. That's why my point earlier, we'll have massive abundance. People won't need to work if they don't want to. But that doesn't change that we're a social species, that we like things. We're on a hedonic treadmill. We're going to continue to want greater status and greater consumption. So yeah, I think it's great. I think it'll do the same thing electricity did. The world changed massively from electricity, and our lives have gone massively better. I think artificial superintelligence will do the same. But then we all sort of like we have a lack of imagination for what will happen next, and I think that lack of imagination is to say, well, it's either not going to happen, or if it happens, all bets are off. And I don't know if I really buy that argument.
Do you think at some point humanity and AI will merge completely, or are we just going to stay in a scenario where it's a very smart, very useful tool, but humans are augmented but still separate and doing their thing?
I think the future is humans will be embodied non-biologically. Then they're basically just digital recreations. The subjective experience of that human will be the same. You will still feel you just happen to be embodied non-biologically. And then at that point, you are going to be merged with AI. Like, you will have the instant capabilities to connect to all the world's information. You will have the same subjective experience. You'll just also know a lot more. So yeah, I do think in the symbiosis, there's an augmentation argument here today, but I think it will be intertwined so inextricably that I don't think it will really matter what the distinction is. The idea that there's a separate thing called AI and humans, I think, will disappear in the future, when we will just be, we will be embodied digitally. We won't be embodied with these meat-like neurons. We'll be embodied non-biologically. And in that point, yeah, we are AI.
That makes a lot of sense to me. However, in that scenario, once my mind is emulated in a machine, it doesn't have any of the limitations of the living tissue. I would probably choose to go beyond just perfect emulation of my current mind. I would probably opt in to tweak my source code and to use some of the architecture that much bigger, much more powerful LLMs are using.
You already do that every day. Your source code massively changes every 24 hours. What makes you is not static. It is dynamic. And that is what is in the nature of a living being, is that we are a learning machine that continues to change and evolve. And every day you get better. Even if you don't read a book, you're learning, you're experiencing, you're listening, you have input into your brain, the subjective experience of your senses. And that creates a model, a network, a pattern in your brain that is constantly evolving. So absolutely, like you will not be able, if it was a sufficiently good enough emulation that you would be satisfied that it's you, it would be impossible for you to choose not to update your source code. And that analogy is not great, because source code is static. It will not, the weights of your mind, your brain, the network that is your brain, will constantly be updating. And that is what it means to live.
That's true. My brain is constantly rewiring, but there are still some limitations. Like, I cannot give myself 10x higher processing speed, whereas a computer can have it, or like 100x higher, capacity.
That is why the name of our company is Limitless. We are limited by our own biology. We want to enable you to free the human mind from its biological limits. And that's why we're doing what we're doing.
I like the sound of that. I think the name is spot on. It's self-explanatory. And I can't wait to see you continue pushing the boundaries of human limits with Limitless.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Thank you for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, likewise. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.